I think I should say thank you for having had me. But even at the risk of disappointing you, I'm going to speak. First of all, let me say how pleased I am and what a very great honor it is to speak to a group that comes together not merely for the usual purposes of professionalism, of trying to find out what the other man knows or doesn't know, or for entertainment only, but for a common spiritual gathering, for a meeting of personalities, of spirits, and of intellects. And I hope that it is in this spirit that we can try to explore together some of the new findings, the new insights that are won today in the sciences. I was very much struck yesterday and very deeply gratified by Madame Rabbani's remark about the importance placed on the independent investigation of scientific insight, scientific knowledge. I was in a position, and I'm still in a position, where I am carrying out such independent investigation, and I find that this investigation is paralleled in some sense by the faith that you all share, and which to me is so very attractive and so very valid. So without further remarks and further preliminaries, let me read to you primarily because I understand there are some French-speaking friends here. Je vous salue, des amis français de l'expression française, mais je peux parler qu'une langue à la fois, donc je vais parler anglais. But these French-speaking friends of ours who are getting interpretation, so I shall remain with the text that's prepared, and which perhaps, if you like, may also be available afterwards. But I cannot prevent myself, not resist the temptation to make some remarks every once in a while about things that I've heard, things that I've learned, even just in these little over 24 hours since I have participated in this meeting. First of all, let me start with a quotation from Shoghi Effendi. I was so very pleased yesterday that Madame Rabbani emphasized some of those same quotations that struck me. Of course, she knows them all, and I only know a few, but it was a great confirmation to me that at least the ones that I happen to know and that I chose are also important to her. The first one is this, and I quote, "The Baha'i faith teaches that the fundamental purpose of religion is to promote concord and harmony, that it must go hand in hand with science, and that it constitutes the sole and ultimate basis of a peaceful and ordered and progressive society." The path to peace in contemporary society is not just one of the many quests of humankind, but the basic and the ultimate quest. Without it, no other goals can be achieved. No other purposes can be pursued. Human survival is at stake, the continuation of the remarkable adventure of life and consciousness that is embodied in our species. This quest is of more than local significance. Surely it matters for the entire universe, for whatever spirit or intelligence that we call by the name of God is at work. A species that has gained knowledge of itself, and some, although perhaps still rudimentary, but already significant knowledge of the nature of the cosmos, that such a species should survive and achieve a higher, a more perfect understanding both of itself and of the world. In humankind, the world comes to know itself, and if humankind vanishes, the world itself becomes poorer, less able to reflect the force, the spirit or the intelligence that underlies its complex and harmonious processes. The path to peace can only be tread through understanding. Peace doesn't come about by accident. The cards are too stacked against it in a world that is complex and full of short-sighted practices and selfish interests. Understanding, however, can be gained in different ways. One of the ways is through insight and intuition. The other through reasoning and experimentation. The former is the domain of religion, the latter of science. The way through insight and intuition is unfettered by considerations of method and application of preconceived rules. It moves above the clouds and views the vastest vistas. Its strong point is depth and perspective, but perhaps its weak point is dependence on personal insight, on personal revelation. The way through reasoning and experimentation moves close to the ground. It looks only before the feet and tests the ground before placing foot on it. Its weakness is reduced horizons and the possible loss of perspective. Its advantage is the certitude conveyed by repeatable tests and by observations. The path to peace, then, is through understanding, and the way of understanding takes us either through the high road of prophecy or the low road of science. But does this choice create a problem? I fully agree with Madame Rabbani, who said yesterday it does not create a problem. These two roads come together in the Baha'i faith and in contemporary science. This is the ideal case in which the two roads lead to the same destination, when science and religion go hand in hand. In this case, the prophecy is true and the science is valid. And together they offer perspective with insight, detailed specification with applicable information, wisdom with knowledge. Going hand in hand, science and religion can be, in the words of Shoghi Effendi, the ultimate basis of a peaceful and ordered and a progressive society. Now, the notes that follow give some indications that this indeed may be the actual case in the instance presented by the Baha'i writings and by some fields of contemporary science. If the harmony between the spiritual and intellectual fountainheads could be demonstrated, religious faith would be bolstered by scientific knowledge, and the two together would shine brightly as the torches that light humankind's path to peace. The method I have chosen for my presentation this morning to tackle this vast and challenging task is simple and perhaps inadequate, but it is to the point. It is to take a passage, one of the few passages that I'm familiar with, that seems to me particularly relevant and meaningful from the basic writings of the Baha'i faith, and to place it alongside some of the conclusions that emerge from the study of the theories of the pertinent new sciences. Clearly, neither can I cover all the passages that are particularly relevant and meaningful in the Baha'i writings, nor can I cover all the theories and findings of the contemporary sciences. But perhaps I can demonstrate the feasibility of tackling this task, and perhaps I can encourage others who are more qualified than I to bring this to completion. Let me then begin by quoting some of these remarkably prophetic passages from the Baha'i writings, and then tell you what I think of them in the light of the contemporary scientific knowledge systems. First, these are all well-known quotes. A quote from Baha'u'llah. The well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. A further quote on this from Shoghi Effendi. His cause stands identified with and revolves around the principle of the organic unity of mankind as representing the consummation of the whole process of human evolution. And immediately following this, I would like to add another quote from Baha'u'llah as follows. The winds of despair are, alas, blowing from every direction, and the strife that divides and afflicts the human race is daily increasing. The signs of impending convulsions and chaos can now be discerned, inasmuch as the prevailing order appears to be lamentably defective. Now, these citations, to my mind, together convey one single and basic truth. The truth that peace and well-being are impossible without unity, and that the attainment of unity takes us, alas, through despair, strife, convulsions, and chaos. This prophetic insight is remarkable in that it perceives disunity as a prelude to, and not as a contradiction or negation of, unity. It's remarkable also in that it views humankind's path on this planet as a process of evolution toward a mature, fully evolved condition. These insights were known to Baha'u'llah a century and a half ago. They were not known to science until a few years ago. That they are now known to the followers of the Baha'i faith, as well as to the international scientific avant-garde, gives us cause for hope as we look around us and see the winds of despair blowing from every direction. We can now find more and more reasons to be assured that these are not winds of dissolution, decadence, and devolution, but winds that herald a new synthesis, a new creativity, a new and decisive step in evolution. A step that, in the words of Shoghi Effendi, marks the highest stage in the stupendous evolution of man's collective life on this planet. Let me come now to these, what I already mentioned, independently investigated scientific knowledge systems. And I ask you to bear with me for a little while as I go through some of these, perhaps at first sight, somewhat difficult theories, but I'll try to make them understandable, because they're very important, I think very important for you and for all people, but for you especially, who have the same convictions already, and you find that it's confirmed by the sciences. Must keep in mind that science always proceeds in different stages. There's a so-called normal stage when scientists are very cautious and they experiment and they try to prove theories. And then every once in a while there happen to be revolutions in science, a complete transformations of the basic assumptions. And alternative theories, new conceptions coming up. Some fields of contemporary sciences have been in such a state of revolution for at least the past decade. New theories have emerged and classical conceptions have collapsed. The most remarkable among these new fields are those that deal with the emergence of complexity in nature and in the human world. These fields have originated with general system theory, which was pioneered by Ludwig von Bertalanffy, Paul Weitz, Rappaport, Kenneth Boulding, and a few others who we may know. They progressed with the science of cybernetics, developed by Norbert Wiener and others. In the 1960s, they were reinforced by the work of Aharon Kachalski, Ilya Prigozhin, who got the Nobel Prize for it in the 1970s, and their followers by John von Neumann, and other people who today, in these new fields which span physics, biology, the social realm, and even mathematics, who develop this field in a way that does not fit into any classical disciplinary compartments. They deal with complexity. They deal with how complex systems evolve, how they interact, how they exist in this dynamic world. These new fields show that complexity, more precisely complex dynamic systems, such as particles, cells, atoms, molecules, organisms, ecologies, societies, and so on. How these emerge in a constant and yet discontinuous process that is creative and which is far from predetermined. Unlike the traditional sciences that viewed evolution as a deterministic process, is oriented toward a state of equilibrium, which underemphasize chance and instability in favor of stability, control, predictability. These new sciences do not formulate laws that would uniquely determine the way evolution unfolds. The newly conceived laws state ensembles, whole groups of possibilities within which evolution can find its own way. As Ilya Prigozhin points out, these dynamic, complex systems have what he calls a divergence property. What is this? It means that if you start from the same initial conditions, from the same basic point, for two systems which are exactly the same at that time, and you allow them to develop, to evolve, one will go in one way, the other might evolve in a different way. The way they evolve, of course, is not chaotic, not totally free, not totally anarchic. There are some laws within which all these systems must exist. These are the possibilities, the constraints given in the universe. But these are very broad, very generous possibilities. And within these possibilities, each system chooses its own paths of evolution. As it chooses its next evolutionary stage, fresh opportunities, fresh possibilities become available. Thus, in this new perspective, evolution is creative. Its past is always logical, it's always comprehensible. If you look backwards, we can always understand why a system has evolved the way it did. But its future is open. Its future is open to choice. So the past of a system is part of its present, but its future is not. Its future arises from its present on the basis of a creative choice that incorporates these general laws, but allows freedom, allows creativity. Evolution has a general direction and also has a dominant dynamic, a way of progressing in that direction. So let me illustrate this very general statement in regard to some more specific, more concrete data. Let's look at the levels of evolution on Earth. You heard a great deal yesterday about how reality, nature operates on different levels. I myself would not like to put any value judgment to these levels. To me, an atom or an amoeba or a plankton in the sea is a very good system, is a very stable system. To me, I don't see myself being a better one than the amoeba. We are operating, however, on different levels of evolution. And these are levels which we can organize perhaps in three large categories. And perhaps I'd like to get the first slide at this point. These three categories make up the material systems in the universe, the living systems, and the social, human systems. hopefully you can make these out. The lines, these horizontal lines, are simply meant to indicate many, many different levels of organization in which these systems that emerge in the course of time in the universe exist. The lowest level is the realm of matter. Nancy Ward last night sang beautifully about the three levels. She didn't know it, but the lowest level is dirt. So the next one are plants and animals, and then come people. Of course, people live in societies, so the highest level is the socio-cultural level of communities of human beings. So evolution moves on the whole from the lower to the higher levels, but it does not leave the lower levels empty. Obviously, the universe is full of atoms, full of particles, full of molecules. We even know what enormously wide range of systems, particle systems, and even molecular systems exist in the universe. But whenever conditions are suitable, like on the surface of a planet such as Earth, these already structured molecular and supramolecular systems pull together. They emerge under conditions which I will say a few words about in a minute. And out of this emerges then the next level of simple organisms, the protobions, the protocells, the precursors of life. When once this has occurred, and it has occurred in a surprisingly short time after the Earth was formed, perhaps already a billion years, and this is we're talking about 5 billion years total, and perhaps already after a billion years that the Earth was formed, these life forms have emerged. It's not an accident. It can't be accidental. People are nowadays saying very strongly, biologists will tell you, there's not enough time for a random process to bring up life. It must have been a purpose, must have been something embedded in the nature of the universe that allows these higher level systems to come about as soon as conditions are right. And so biological systems emerge on the second level. And when these systems achieve a certain level of complexity, they begin to interact, and it can happen, although probably elsewhere in the universe need not happen in every case, that mind, consciousness, self-awareness emerges, and the systems that form are not merely social systems such as the colonies of ants or bees, but also socio-cultural systems, systems that can know themselves, know the universe, and can have an inkling of their creator. Thank you. Let's go on to the next one. So look at this series of systems that emerge. Because if you do look at them, you will immediately see the unity of nature, the unity of creation, if you like. Because the systems themselves move from level to level, while each level continues to exist. From particles to atoms, to molecules, to macromolecules, to the protozoa, the metazoa, the complex systems, the ecological systems, and to social systems. We as individuals are metazoa, we are multicellular systems ourselves. We live within ecosystems, we live in the embrace of nature, and we live within socio-cultural systems, which is ultimately the society that embraces all human beings, the global society. What happens is that as evolution progresses, given much time, but it does speed up, as I'll say in a moment, the strongly bonded particles, the units that are very strongly bonded, like the elementary particles, the atoms, they get integrated in higher and higher level systems which are less strongly bonded. but more flexible, more complex, more creative. You know what happens when you break apart an atom. We all know that. And it happens like it did in Chernobyl, we are rather worried about it, in an uncontrolled fashion. But when it's controlled, of course, you can use this energy. But it's an enormous energy in a tiny, tiny, sub-microscopic system. If you would break apart the molecule, the energy released is much less. If you break apart the human being, the energy that's released is so small that it won't even register on an instrument, but we do know that it was there because all of the integral unity of an organism that makes it one system, it disappears and the cells and molecules dissolve, decay into their own level. If you break apart the social system, there is suffering, but it's still the energy that binds it is looser, is lesser. However, there is more complexity, there is more freedom, there is more possibility of adjustment the higher you go on these levels. So basically, what I want to demonstrate here to you is a unity of nature, a unity that includes the human being, includes human society, and that ultimately takes us from the quarks, from the most minute particles that were created in the first microseconds of the existence of the universe. It takes us through evolution on Earth and perhaps on other planets, toward a society that encompasses all of the systems on that planet in a single unity. And of course, this could be none other than the society of all of the higher level societies. All human societies, all the ecologists as their life-giving environment, that is the global society. Let me go on now to one other factor here, which is important to note. Just how systems form on these various organizational levels. Scientists have observed that when sufficiently complex components, such as heavy molecules, protocell cells, are exposed to a flow of energy, when you immerse them in a flow of energy, they tend to become organized in such a way that they incorporate these energies, make use of them. Here I must insert one well-known factor, which, however, we often tend to forget. Is that if you want to keep anything going, whether it's your car, your body, your parliament, or whatever, you have to constantly replenish it, because it does use energy, it does use information, or energy organizes information. Every time you move, you dissipate, you use up energies. You take in fresh air, you breathe, you take in oxygen, you take in nourishment, you take in free energies by that means. So we exist in a flow of energy. Where does this flow come from? It comes from the sun. Almost all organisms today, except some newly discovered deep-sea organisms that live on geothermal energy, but there are very few of those, all other forms of life live on solar energy. And we live in this flow which is translated by primitive photosynthetic organisms into the green leaf, which is being eaten by other animals. The other animals are eaten by still others, etc., until we get to the highest level predators. And it all forms a system. The point I'd like to make first is that these many systems form cycles, self-maintaining cycles, which constantly replenish the energies that are being used up, so that they maintain themselves. That's a precondition of evolution. If you would close, I'm sorry, I just interject this point and I go back to my text in a moment. If you would close up this room, hermetically seal it, what would happen? We are hopefully a nice intercommunicating group. We are hopefully a nice intercommunicating group at the present time. We like to think together, we like to feel together. But close it up. Not all the goodwill in the world would keep us alive. You see, the air would gradually be used up. The temperature would equalize around our body temperatures, which we could live with, but it would be rather warm. Ultimately, we would die. And ultimately, all our bodies would decay and dissolve to the stable components. Why? We have to take in, not only have to take in nourishment, we have to take in air. We have to take in all of the things that maintain us alive. And of course, if a community, such as the Baha'i community or a Christian or whatever community, is to maintain itself, it also has to feed constantly on information, on new inputs, which it does, which in your case is, I think, is revelation. So, we are open systems. We maintain ourselves in this flow. And the only way we can stay put is by evolving, by using these inputs to improve ourselves, to evolve further. Let me have the next one. There was another famous physicist, Manfred Eigen, still alive today, is a relatively young man, who has discovered that even at the very basis of life, the way these nucleic acids that code the cells, the organisms, the most basic mechanisms of life, the way these are organized is in these cooperative cycles. They constantly bring in energy, and one thing leads to another. For example, if you look at one of those circles, you will find that it has, according to the arrow, it has the information necessary to reproduce itself. But not only will it reproduce itself, it will also catalyze, or produce rather in this case, an enzyme. And this enzyme, in turn, will catalyze the production of another nucleic acid. But aside from the complexity of this particular example, you can apply it to any human group, for example. We not only maintain ourselves, we also bring out ideas that help other people maintain themselves. On institutions are interacting. One thing maintains itself, maintains something else at the same time. So that these cycles, when they form, they create a system. And these higher level systems are the ones that exist in the universe and that can evolve into still higher and higher levels of complexity. And as you will see in a moment, let me just add at this point, that these cycles are the ones that we must create on the global level, on the international level, if we are to have a global society. Because they are lacking as yet. Each society is enclosed in its own circle. We do not move outside of it yet, or not in any dependable way. Let me get to the next one. You see, if you look at the way all life is organized on Earth, you will find that in general terms, it is organized in terms of these cycles. Energy flows from the sun. And you see, the biosphere is that rather uneven circle, which is about as even as I could make it with this pencil. This is the biosphere. Within the biosphere, energy reaches the plants. The plants are food for animals, which are food for other animals, etc. Everything is used. Even the dead bodies of plants or animals fertilize the soil. And even in decay, they feed new life. Everything is used except some waste energy which already, when the solar energy is having been used, is, as the physicists call, degraded, a lower level of energy, as waste heat is radiated off, and is radiated off into space. And the whole biosphere is a kind of a living, breathing organism that uses the solar energy, maintains itself, and evolves its subsystems, evolves them into greater and greater unity, into greater and greater inter-existence, coexistence. It does this in nature. The global ecology is one unit. Then comes man, creates societies, which breaks up nature for selfish purposes. And what we have to decide now is how to create out of these many selfish, self-centered units, whereby the global ecology has been broken up into these local ecologies at war with one another, how this can be put together again into a global unity, which will be the highest level of unity that we can achieve on Earth. Before getting back to the Baha'i writings and another figure, let me just add an additional factor. The way evolution progresses is through alternating phases of stability and instability. This is the key factor. If all systems in the world were to come into being with total or sufficient stability to withstand all changes in the environment, then the world would still be populated by hydrogen atoms and hardly anything else. Evolution unfolds precisely because the systems that emerge in its course are not stable. They can be disturbed. They can be moved out of these stable states. They can be destabilized. Many experiments now confirm that when a critically destabilized system is produced in the laboratory, it enters a transitory phase characterized by indeterminacy, by randomness, some degree of chaos. But this chaotic phase comes to an end when the same destabilized system settles into a new mode of organization. Possibly and very often on a higher level of organization. Complex systems that appear in the real world always have these multiple possibilities for achieving a new kind of stability. When one of these steady states is disturbed, other steady states, other stable states can become accessible. And there is a simple law, a simple regularity that's discovered in the sciences. The further the systems are from a state of equilibrium, and here very specific equilibrium is meant not psychological balance, but thermodynamic equilibrium, which means that there is no new energy possibility, no flow of energy, no gradient of energy. Everything is equalized. If you would close this room, as I said a moment ago, totally, after X number of days or perhaps weeks, we would be in equilibrium. That means there will be no differences between you and me. We would all be decaying to the same level. Temperature would be the same. And this kind of unity we don't need. But the further we are from this equilibrium, from this absolute uniformity, the more dynamic we are, the more choices there are for us to find new ways of organizing ourselves. Let me look at the next figure. On the left of this, you'll find the area where, suppose that we are closest to equilibrium. As we move to the right, we move further away from equilibrium. We become more dynamic. Okay? Now, there are long periods during which nothing much happens. A system is stable. For example, in its environment, a society can be stable. A species is unchanged. A hydrogen atom in the vast reaches of some galaxy remains the same. As you move toward in time, there could be a point in which this stability is disrupted and something new emerges. A critical instability occurs. Then the system can move into another phase. It's called the so-called phase change occurs. Another state is occupied by the system, and this state is further from equilibrium. It's a more complex state. And the further you go, the more frequently these destabilizations occur, and the greater the number of alternatives available. Just think of how many alternatives there are for a hydrogen atom in the universe. You know, if you take in any high school physics class, that the hydrogen can transform into helium. And the complex processes can further transform into deuterium, etc. But basically, there's not much choice for a poor hydrogen atom once it's destabilized inside the sun, for example, in an extremely hot environment. However, if you take an organism, how many mutations are available to a biological species? How many new kinds of species could evolve? If you take a society, look at the enormous range of possibilities. Possibly all of the societies in history are just an infinitely small segment of the possible types of societies and cultures that we could develop on Earth. They've hardly begun this enormous development. This is why I think it's quite right when it's stated in the Baha'i writings that we are just in the age of adolescence. We have hardly explored what it is to be an adult in that sense. So, let's have the next one. So let me conclude this part now, and then just say a few more things afterwards before ending, by trying to put these things together. The unity of nature, which encompasses the unity of humanity and the unity of society. Moving from level to level of organization, toward complexity, toward also vulnerability, but freedom and creativity, moving to higher levels. Through periods of stability and periods of instability, through long periods of boredom and short periods of transformation. In fact, one biologist, Professor Ager, said that all biological evolution seems to resemble the life of a soldier. Life of a soldier, which is basically long periods of boredom interspersed with short periods of terror. And if we get on now toward our own condition in humanity, we find that whatever period of boredom there may have been in the Middle Ages, they weren't very long, but there was a certain amount of stability on lack of major change for a number of centuries has come to an end. Has come to an end already in the 19th century, and we are heading toward a period of change. And if we are clever, it will not be a period of terror, but a period of creative change, a new phase change into something else, into a greater level of unity. All right, just a short remark, because looking into the future, let me first of all say that I've been very inspired and very pleased to have received, alas, only 2 weeks ago, the new book by Dr. Hossein Danesh and on Unity, the Creative Foundation of Peace. And I quite agree with what he writes, among others there, and let me quote just one or two sentences from him. He says that in the final analysis, all successful transformation of human societies must of necessity conform to universal laws of growth. This is what I have been talking about, the universal laws of growth. But he adds, and I quite agree, that the growth dynamics of societies, the same as of human beings, are natural as well as intentional. While they must respect the universal laws of evolution, they can exploit the freedom within the laws to create the kind of growth and development that makes us and our world diverse, united, and beautiful. So when we talk about the New World Order, these are the concepts that you have to keep in mind. Natural as well as intentional. These are the natural laws of growth, of evolution. They're very permissive because, as I said, they're highly creative. The more complex a system, the more creative it can be. So, intentional evolution comes into play. We could master our own evolution. And then I'm struck again by another passage from Shoghi Effendi. Even though I'm sure you know it all by heart, let me just take a moment to read it, because this is a prophetic insight which I find of very great validity. This is what he says: a world community in which all economic barriers will have been permanently demolished and the interdependence of capital and labor definitely recognized, in which the clamor of religious fanaticism and strife will have been forever stilled, in which the flame of racial animosity will have been finally extinguished, in which a single code of international law, the product of the considered judgment of the world's federated representatives, shall have as its sanction the instant and coercive intervention of the combined forces of the federated units. And finally, a world community in which the fury of a capricious and militant nationalism will have been transmuted into an abiding consciousness of world citizenship. Such, indeed, appears in its broadest outline the order anticipated by Baha'u'llah, an order that shall come to be regarded as the fairest fruit of a slowly maturing age. And as he adds, let me just continue, it calls for a wider loyalty, for a larger aspiration than any that has animated the human race. It insists upon the subordination of national impulses and interests to the imperative claims of a unified world. It repudiates excessive centralization on one hand and disclaims all attempts at uniformity on the other. Its watchword is unity in diversity. I was tremendously gratified yesterday and pleased that Madame Rabbani emphasized the same factor. Because what the Baha'i prophecy tells us about the future of humankind anticipates to a remarkable degree the conclusions of this independently derived application of these new sciences of complexity. For the Baha'i prophecy outlines a system formed on the global planetary level of organization by these complex cycles, the so-called hypercycles, connecting the functioning of diverse yet harmonized nations, peoples, and cultures. When the New World Order arrives, today's nation-states will have given up their claims of unconditional sovereignty and acknowledge their membership in the human family. As Shoghi Effendi said, what else could these weighty words signify if they did not point to the inevitable curtailment of unfettered national sovereignty as an indispensable preliminary to the formation of the future commonwealth of all the nations of the world. Let me have the next and last slide. That's the lower part, a little high. We can, just the last thing I'd like to look at, if we apply these insights from the sciences, combining with the prophetic insights from the founders of the Baha'i faith, you will see a harmonious development which accelerates tremendously. Because perhaps it accelerates as we are now entering the critical phases of adolescence, collective adolescence. It moves from simple societies that are highly stable. You know that about 99% of the time of all societies on Earth, all organized human societies, have been spent in the Stone Age, in Stone Age societies. They were highly stable, highly integrated in their environment. Hunting-gathering societies. They have been destabilized by the invention, among other things, of fire, of the domestication of animals, of agriculture, the Neolithic revolution. New kinds of societies came about. Agrarian, pastoral societies transforming into agricultural societies. These societies, in turn, through the invention of writing, communication, growing technologies, the wheel, better modes of transportation, the charting of the seas, etc., transforming into higher level, more complex societies. Fewer and fewer people engaged in growing food, in taking care of the necessities of life. More and more people being able to engage in cultural pursuits, in intellectual pursuits. Until today, a very small percentage of the labor force works in the so-called primary sectors of agriculture and the most basic goods for survival. More and more of us are working now in the services, more and more in the cultural, intellectual fields. As we move up, the chances, the perspectives, the freedom of choice increases. Could I have it this side, please? The other, yeah. As we move from these agricultural societies, we move toward the feudal, if you like, pre-industrial societies, industrial societies. Now we are moving into post-industrial societies. And these post-industrial societies are now operating in such a way in which they are becoming strongly interdependent. And this is the last point I'd like to make, but I'd like to make it as clearly as I can and as forcefully as I can. You hear a great deal about living in a global village. I don't believe we do. I think we live in a kind of a global, interdependent world locked into a lot of national and local villages. We are locked together in an interdependence, but we do not know how to make use of this interdependence. We are at each other's throats. Mankind is one. We are all its citizens, but we haven't created yet that state of which we could be joint citizens. Despite of the many signs of interdependence, despite of the many efforts of international organizations, the United Nations, the many regional bodies, the many international private sector organizations such as multinational corporations, non-governmental organizations, and so on. Despite of this, the world is today in a highly unstable condition. It is moving from one crisis to another. And we have to realize that this age of maturity that we're awaiting is yet to be achieved. We are operating on this threshold of a major change, of a major phase change, of a major transformation. And to my mind, if I look for hopeful signs, the hopeful signs are not directly in the achievements of multinational corporations, in accords or resolutions reached in the United Nations. These could be all important elements, but they are not decisive elements. These are all progress, signs of progress which is far too slow to keep pace with the growth of interdependence, with the growth of the human population, now 5 billion at this moment, growing toward over 6 billion by the turn of the century, and the tremendous appetite it has for technology, for energy, for information, tremendous rising expectations. To keep pace with all this, we do have to create some kind of a globally expanded civilization. And these tiny steps that we are taking today are not sufficient to get us there. So there will be a major change. This system, as it is now, even with the signs of progress that it makes, is not sustainable. I cannot see, on the basis of the information that I've had at my disposal in the United Nations, on the basis of the discussions we are having in the Club of Rome, or anywhere else, I cannot see how this present system could survive into the 21st century. There is going to be a major change. And in this major change, the seeds of the new order will come to blossom. And those seeds that we plant today will have the chance to blossom into a new order tomorrow. Because what I want to, as a final thought, what I want to leave with you is this. Freedom is a marvelous thing, but it's also dangerous. Because it can lead us into a new world that is creative, that is fulfilling, that is humane. It can also lead us into a new world that is repressive, that is inhumane, that is full of terror. If Hitler could have established his 1,000-year Reich and enforced it with the nuclear bomb, we would have had a reign of terror for a long time. Perhaps not for 1,000 years, but perhaps in our lifetime. This is always a possibility. The laws of evolution will not dictate the exact kind of society that will emerge. I am convinced that unless, through some incredible stupidity or accident, we'll wipe ourselves off the face of this earth through a nuclear catastrophe, unless that happens, we will create a global society. But what kind of society? That is the key issue. We could create a global dictatorship. Hopefully we will create a humane society, a society in which the individual can grow, can develop, can become a citizen and a participating agent of this new world. And for this reason, I think movements such as yours, such as the one in which we're all participating in this moment, have such crucial importance. These are the seeds which today are repressed, but tomorrow will have the chance to grow. I hope we can all grow with it. Thank you very much.